To shine a light on the fight against censorship and celebrate the freedom to read, we invite local artists and the general public, ages 13 and up, to submit original artwork to QPL's Banned Books Library Card Design Contest. The winning art will be featured on QPL's Banned Books Special Edition Library Card, and the winning artist will also receive a $2,000 cash prize. Learn more and enter the contest today at queenslib.org/design contest. Our Hispanic Heritage Month celebrations continue at the library. Explore our virtual and in-person programs, discover our special Hispanic Heritage book lists for all ages, and grab a copy of our Hispanic Heritage brochure from your local library. Visit queenslib.org/blog to learn more. Halloween is coming soon. It's time to make some spooky crafts, watch scary movies, hear ghost stories, and wear your favorite costume. And you can do all of that and more at the library. Visit the QPL calendar on our website to learn about all of our Halloween programs.
Good evening. This is Heidi Gelliver, and welcome to Culture Connection. Culture Connection, curated by Dan Zaleski and now in its 11th year at the Queens Public Library, is proud to present international artists from emerging talent to award-winning masters. These disciplines include music, theater, author talks, and film. Now expanding into a virtual format, Culture Connection is currently reaching a global audience. I'm really happy to have with us tonight two New Yorkers and writers who have both had prolific careers so far. Jean Hanff-Korelitz is the author of 9 novels, most recently The Sequel, this October 24, which is now, The Late Comer and The Plot, which are both in development for a limited series, You Should Have Known, adapted as the HBO series The Undoing, and Admission, the basis for the 2013 film starring Tina Fey. Both The Plot and The Sequel are entertaining page-turners about writers and writing with a wry sense of humor that I highly recommend reading. Priscilla Gilman wrote a memoir that explored her experiences growing up in New York City as the daughter of Richard Gilman, the well-known drama and literary critic, and Lynn Nesbitt, one of New York's most successful literary agents. The Critic's Daughter is an engaging read that chronicles the adventures of a young girl coming of age as a witness to their relationship and the company of endless authors and artists. Priscilla is the author of 2 acclaimed memoirs, The Anti-Romantic Child in 2001 and The Critic's Daughter in 2023. This really is such a perfect pairing for conversation about these books for many reasons. One being that the books poke fun at the publishing industry in general, which I'm sure that Priscilla can relate to, and both of you have a lot of real life experience with. To get started, I'd like to direct a question to Jean. Can you just tell us a little bit about the stories of The Plot and The Sequel for those who may not be familiar with the books?
Right. So that's easy in this case.
It's not so easy.
These are fiendishly difficult books to describe because you don't want to ruin them for people who A, have not read them, and B, want to read them. So with respect to those people, I'm going to say that The Plot is about a writer whose career is in decline. He's published a first novel that, got a little bit of attention, but not much, and has not been able to write anything since. And he finds himself teaching at let's call it a low prestige Master of Fine Arts program in Vermont. And into his classroom walks the most irritating, annoying, narcissistic, braggadocious writer who claims in front of everybody that, he doesn't need any of you people because the book he's writing has such a extraordinary plot that it cannot fail. It's going to be so successful, and everybody kind of looks at him like, who are you? But then in private with his teacher, this failed writer, he reveals this plot, and the writer, whose name is Jake, really has to conclude to his own disappointment that this guy's absolutely right. I mean, this story, it cannot fail. It is that good. And a few years go by, and he realizes that he hasn't heard anything about this book coming out, and it is a book that he would have heard of. So he goes to his computer and looks up this former student, and he discovers that this man has died, and not even recently. He died within months of their meetings. So that means that this book does not exist. It has not been written. Certainly it has not been published. And there follows a kind of long struggle of the soul in which he has to wrestle with the morality of this situation. And of course, as we know he will, he concludes that the story is too good to leave there. So he writes a novel with this plot. He does not plagiarize. There is nothing to plagiarize. There are no pages. There's nothing. But he writes this former student story, and of course he becomes insanely successful, just as his former student predicted. But he can't really enjoy himself because he's too worried that somehow someone will come out of the woodwork and accuse him of something bad. And guess what? That's exactly what happens. So that's pretty much all I can say about the plot. And when it comes to the sequel, I can almost say even less, even though I know Priscilla's going to get a lot of more information out of me, except that it picks up where the plot left off, and it involves a different character. Yeah, I think that I can say, unless you force me to say something else, and then it'll be your fault, Priscilla.
Jean, I have to say, in preparing for this, I love the plot. I taught it to a book group. We all loved it. I'm a big Patricia Highsmith fan. I love the influence of Patricia Highsmith. Talented Mr. Ripley is one of my favorite books to teach. I think I can say that this low-rent MFA program is called Ripley.
Sure it
that's
is.
important to know.
That's not an accident.
Certainly not an accident. All the inside jokes. Okay, so I just want to say, everybody, this is the sequel because we have the plot behind Jane. This is the sequel. Looks very similar.
Yeah.
I like the sequel even better. Let's say I love the sequel even more than I love the plot.
Wow.
I was laughing out loud to the point where my son, who was home on fall break last week, and this was my third read, Jane. Like, I do 3 reads in preparation. And I'm marking with my red pen. He comes running and he's like, Mom, what are you reading? This looks like a murder book. This looks scary. You're reading this for spooky month. I'm like, it is scary. It's very suspenseful. It's got a great plot. But Jean, I'm serious. It was like, and my mom, I grew up in the publishing industry. My father was a critic. So I know how it feels to be, and my mother was a prominent literary agent. So I grew up on both sides of it, right? My father was eviscerating people.
Your mother was the prominent literary agent, not a.
She was my mom. I hope she's watching. She might be. I sent her the link. Mom, we love you. And so I grew up seeing it from both sides. I grew up seeing the elation when people signed with my mom and or got good reviews, and I lived with the desolation and the despair of failed writers as your protagonist of the plot, or the mid-career writers who made a splash and then faded into obscurity and could never write.
There was a euphemism for failed writer, a mid-career writer.
Exactly, a mid-career or a mid-list. But Jean, one thing that just I find exhilarating about these books, and I am going to be very careful. We're not going to spoil, although we are going to talk about the chapter titles and how you took them from sequels.
Okay.
Because I was just cracking up over and over again, like when you had Little Men. I'm a Louisa May Alcott fan, and I actually really like Little Men, and I do want at some point us to discuss sequels. But it is hard to write a sequel. And, one of my mom's clients, Andy Sean Greer, recently wrote a sequel to his Pulitzer Prize winning book, Less.
I know. I need to read it.
It's so good. Less is Lost. Everybody read it. But I will tell you that my mom called me and she said, Andy wants to write a sequel. sequels are never a good idea. And most agents would say that. However, I know that you, Jean, because I followed your career for a long time now, and I first read you. I read You Should Have Known, and I interviewed you about that book. My interview with Jean is in the paperback of that book. Love that book. Talked to you about Patricia Highsmith when we talked about that book. But I remember you telling me that you started your career, you were a poet, but then your first novel was a legal thriller.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to leave your publisher because your publisher wanted you to write a sequel.
Exactly true. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had accidentally written a legal thriller because my first two novels had been rejected all over the planet, and I felt so desperate. I mean, this was the only thing I'd ever wanted to do, and the rejections had been, really heartbreaking, and almost made worse by the fact that suddenly my generation was bursting into print. It seemed as if everybody I met at a party had a book coming out with Knopf. And,
God.
And then they would come out and I would read them and I would think, really?
Yeah.
And I just felt that I was failing so badly. And then I had a baby and I thought, well, that's it. I've run out of time. How am I going to do anything now? Because as you know, when you have a baby, it's a constant thing. And I felt so dreadful. And I hired a babysitter when my daughter was about, 6 months old, to come for a few hours in the afternoon. And I sat down on that first day to rewrite one of those novels. And some little voice inside me said, don't do that. Write something that somebody will publish, And at that time, that was 1992, that something that somebody would publish was probably going to be a legal thriller.
Yeah.
Because, Scott Turow and John Grisham had invented them about 5 years earlier. And I read them all the time and everybody loved them. And I had a teeny tiny little idea. And I just, for once, didn't listen to that voice in my head that said I couldn't do it. Just long enough to just sit down and write those first few pages.
Jean, I want to read that book. That's like the one of your books that I haven't read.
You can, but it's actually, you can do whatever you want, but don't do it. Because, it's always the one I say, yes, one of the great things about, suddenly having readers late in my career is that all those novels are still there and they haven't changed a word. So, somebody will come up to you and say, well, I never heard of you, like it's my fault. I never heard of you before this plot book or Hugh Grant and Nicole Kidman.
Yep.
But this says here you've written all these novels. And I'll say, yeah, and none of them have changed at all since the day they were published. You can go, wherever you buy your books. But the one that I would say maybe you could give a pass to not read is that first one. Because I think I got better.
But Jean, I'm a genre fiction fan. And this is one of the things that there's so many things about Jean's career and Jean's work that I think are so instructive and inspiring and reassuring to people who want to be writers or people who feel like, oh, if I'm not a literary writer, if I'm not shelved in, the high literature section or put on the table with Jhumpa Lahiri, like I'm not, you can do it all. Your sentences on a sentence to sentence level reading this book, I was like, this is just an exquisite sentence. Like I see the poet in you in the way that you write with cadence, you write with rhythm. You have the perfect turn of phrase, Jean. It's like over and over and over again. It just lands and I love it. At the same time, like I was that girl who, when I was getting my PhD at Yale, subscribing to People magazine. I watch The Bachelor. I know you do too. We need to talk about that later.
Season.
Watching Golden Bachelorette. We'll need to talk about that.
When I get home.
Oh, it's on tonight. Later on, I'm going to be checking it out. And, and I read Patricia Cornwell. I never read the Sue Graftons. Talk about sequels. Yeah. But I do I love thrillers.
Which they wanted me to do after that first novel. They wanted, I loved my character. Her name was Sibylla Muldoon, really just for that name.
Sibylla?
Well, Sibylla was named after Sibylla Melvin, let's see if you can recognize Sibylla Melvin. Come on, literary scholar.
I don't know. I don't.
I'll give you a hint. Australia.
Australia.
Yeah.
Is she from Shirley Hazard? No.
Is she Australian? No, she's not. It's a
No.
great Australian novel called My Brilliant Career.
Oh, I saw the movie with Judy Davis, but I never read the novel. Oh my goodness.
I have to say, I think maybe the movie was a little better, but it was a great book. And she was such a kind of terrific character. So the Sibylla was for Sibylla Melvin, and the Muldoon was for my husband. So
Yeah.
Sibylla Muldoon was the name, and I was supposed to still be writing about Sibylla Muldoon today. And I thought of that A is for Alibi, and by then we were, I don't know, up to M or something. And I thought that is not the writing life that I want for myself. So
Jean, you made the right decision. However, I am getting myself post haste to a bookstore. I'm going to become engrossed in the story of Sibylla Muldoon, and maybe she will make an appearance in a later novel just as a cameo.
I don't think so, but I don't think so. Yeah. The irony is that that first novel starts with this young public defender walking into the courthouse downtown, and now I live a stone's throw from there. So every now and then, you know, if I'm walking past the courthouse, I do think Sibylla Muldoon was here.
Oh, Jean. You know, I'm glad that you mentioned that you've moved downtown and you live there now, because, you know, I could say this is a brilliant satiric novel. It's an incredible satire of academia. It's an incredible, oh my God, the scene where they go to the college and the letters and the sign are fading, and the cinder block building that could kill anyone's soul. I mean, oh, Jean, it was just, as a former professor, it killed me. It's also an incredible book about real estate.
Didn't see that one coming.
Oh, Jean, I was dying. I mean, you have this laser eye for, I mean, the house in Vermont versus the apartment in the city, and the tacky details that your character's eye focuses on the spices in the kitchen, the couple in the house. Oh, I mean, I was screaming with laughter.
There's also I did some research. There's a character in a southern state who lives in a
southern state, yes,
devised community arranged around a golf course, and there are such things as Southern Living, the magazine Southern Living inspired community. It must be like a packaging deal where Southern Living puts its name on certain gated communities. And I just thought that is so perfect. I have to preserve that somehow.
Jean, I was circling every item in that house, that table that no one had ever had a dinner party at.
Yeah. No,
right? The kitchen, all the details. And you have Seattle. I mean, you go all over the country and you nail each community perfectly. Absolutely perfectly.
Okay. Can we talk about the pineapples a little?
Oh, the pineapples. They're a clue, everybody.
Yeah, the pineapples are kind of important. But, you know, you wouldn't think a pineapple is something that you would find on a New England, a 19th century New England wall. But the pineapple, and I only learned this years ago when I went to Charleston, where I'm going to be in about 2 weeks for the book festival. But I went to Charleston many years ago, and I went on an old house tour because that's what I'm into. And they said that the pineapple was such a powerful symbol of hospitality that you would rent a pineapple from the ship. You'd go down to the ship, you'd rent the pineapple, you'd take it to your home for your gathering or dinner party. And then once the guests had left, you took it back. It was so important to have a pineapple on site. And of course, it signified your wealth because you could afford a pineapple, which is not native to South Carolina. So somehow that migrated up to New England, and it was not uncommon to see stenciled pineapples around the walls of New England houses. Why is this important? Well, if you've read the plot, you know, and they will may or may not return to haunt you in the sequel, those pineapples.
Oh, they do. They're actually the only thing I'm allergic to in all the world. So for me, they stood out from the beginning, and then they come in the end of this book too. Again, we have the pineapples returning.
Can't keep a good pineapple down, I guess.
Just all of the descriptions were just so like I really felt like I was there, you know, with the wallpaper and the, you know, the Pepto-Bismol pink and the details of the house, and you know, just I loved reading all of that. It was just really
Heidi, didn't you write? You really feel the avocado green fridge?
Oh yes, that avocado fridge. Yeah, or was it the avocado stove?
It was the avocado stove. I think they'd replaced the fridge. What are we talking about? I can't imagine.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just, I guess the point of talking about all that is the details, you know, like it's just the details in the description. And I listened to the audio version, which was narrated beautifully. Really amazing.
She's, they call her the golden voice, Julia Whalen. She's incredible. I want her to read every single thing I write for the rest of my life.
I mean, it was just so engaging. I stayed up too late listening to it because I just could not stop listening to it, you know? And so if anyone out there really likes audio books, I highly recommend listening to that version. It was just really well done and tons of amazing descriptions in there.
Well, I love real estate. It's true.
You do. You
know, as you know, Priscilla, I do a literary series here in the city called Book the Writer. And our unofficial slogan is come for the literature, stay for the real estate, because we're meeting in people's homes, and that, you know, these homes have to be large enough to accommodate about 25 bodies. And those large homes tend to be pretty spectacular. So, you know, we've met in some incredible apartments. One of them is the Mrs. Maisel apartment, where they filmed The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. And it's a lot of fun to sort of welcome these people into a stranger's home, and you're looking out the window right over the reservoir, and it's pretty nice.
Yeah, I mean,
Heidi,
love real estate, right? I mean, it's always a hot topic.
All New Yorkers are obsessed with real estate.
Yes.
We read the real estate section first, right?
Absolutely. Especially those of us who grew up in New York when the real estate wasn't that expensive and our parents had rent-controlled apartments on Central Park West. Heidi, for the Critic's Daughter, Jean had me to the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel apartment and interviewed me there. It was surreal, and everybody was just looking around. There's also an adorable dog that comes with that apartment.
Oh, amazing!
Oh yes, It was.
I mean,
and
a dog.
I was there. I forget who the author was, and I went home, and I kept thinking, I feel like I've been there before, but I haven't been there before. And then, like in the middle of the night, I thought, "Oh my God, I think I recognize that apartment."
The classic six. They call that a classic six.
Apartment. Yeah, but it has spectacular details, and you know what they did was they filmed the pilot there, and then they built the apartment on the in Queens. So, but it's, you know. But they would come back and do scenes in the lobby and right outside the front door, and you know the host would get mail addressed to Mrs. Maisel.
Oh my goodness!
It's absolutely known in the neighborhood where the apartment was. It's really special. Wow.
So you started as a poet, right? And you're also married to a poet.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your journey? You know, like from poetry into writing novels.
Sure. I was a poet first for only one reason, and it's not that I loved poetry. It's that I was far too terrified to write fiction, specifically a novel. I've never been a short story reader or writer. For me, it was like novel or nothing. There was no kind of, run up to that. So I wrote poetry, and I did publish one book of poems.
Yeah.
And I was in grad school in England at that time, the time that I met my husband. And I mean, I'm sure, Priscilla, you remember this moment. There was this article that was published in, I believe, in the Kenyon Review, an essay rather than an article. And it was all about the impact of the MFA programs on poetry. Mm-hmm. The mid-1980s. And the person writing this essay was Donald Hall, the poet.
Wow.
And he was sort of pointing out that in his opinion, the rise of the MFA programs had been not good for poetry. Dog barking. Because the programs, in his opinion, were turning out something that he called the McPoem, the kind of generic MFA poem. And the problem with having all of these McPoems, in his words, was that it was making it that much more difficult to discern the one or two or three poets in every generation who were John Keats.
Yes.
And therefore, the implication, what he was saying in the essay was, hey, all y'all who are not John Keats, could you stop?
Get out of here.
I read that essay. I sort of heard about it. People had been whining about it. Remember, it was before the internet. So, there was no place to vent online about these things. You just heard about it. I went to the university library at my university and I read the Kenyon Review. And I remember vividly reading this essay and thinking, I'm not Keats. And then I met Keats because I've met my husband, and you know what? He was Keats.
He was. He absolutely was.
And I just thought I have to stop. But of course, I didn't stop right away. But I think from that time, I was thinking I have really got to learn to be brave enough to write what I want to write, and that was fiction. And it took another 5 years or so, and then and then I wrote 2 novels that were rejected everywhere, and that was not the way I hoped that would go. But I just kept going, and I'm very proud that I kept going. And I pulled myself up, and I did it again, and I did it again, and finally, I got to a place where I have readers, and it took many books to get there, but I'm incredibly grateful that I was supported along the way. I had an agent who supported me. I had an editor who supported me, and eventually the readers came. And very, very.
Well, I'm certainly glad that you got there, and I'm sure that Priscilla is really glad that you got there. And Priscilla, you were just saying earlier that there were so many moments that you were just like laughing out loud, like at both the plot and the sequel. And I just wonder, like, what were some of the coming from your background, what are some of the things that were just like so on point for you?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, where do I begin? Okay. I mean, there was just one brilliant satiric set piece after another. So we talked about the visiting of the college and the horrible buildings and the letter stating, the lunch with the agent. I mean, the inanity of these comments that are made. When she gets told that what a character gets told that there's going to be a New York Times profile. I was fortunate enough that with The Critic's Daughter, I was profiled in the New York Times. And it just flashed me back to that. And I was thinking, thank goodness I had the amazing Penelope Green writing my profile. But the way that this character games it, she reads all the profiles and she tries to figure out which profiles work in making the person sympathetic and which work. I never even thought about it that. I was just like, oh, come to my house, Penelope Green, let's meet. I was like, maybe I should have been a little bit more like
a sociopath. But as you, Kathy, you would have researched more.
Oh, Jean. But the other thing I felt this, and it's interesting because you've said to me when I interviewed you before, and I feel the same way, you and I do not love writing. We don't enjoy the process of writing the way a lot of writers do. It's another reason why I love Jean, because she relieves, I feel guilty that I don't love to write. And you relieve my guilt about that. You and I are the same also. We wait a long time in between books. We live our lives. We do our parenting. We do our other things. I don't feel bad about that. But, in terms of the humor of this character, I just felt you having fun, and that it was almost like a release to be able to make some of these sardonic points that we don't make out loud. My mother always says, There are way too many writers. You know, the world is glutted with too many books that shouldn't have been published. And every time we get on an airplane, I mean, I worked as an agent for 5 years with my mom.
Mhm.
You know, if you tell someone you're an agent, oh, I've got a novel. Oh, my dentist has a novel. My daughter has one, right? And you're able, through this sociopathic character, to voice some truths. Right? Like a lot of what she does is crazy, but a lot of it is she's discerning. She's funny. She's astute. And I said, you know what? And I was thinking of all these sort of unlikable, devious, manipulative, but irresistible characters in fiction that I love, like Becky Sharp from Vanity Fair, right? Or Ripley. I'm a huge Ripley fan. I haven't watched the new adaptation.
Oh, it's great.
So it is.
Yeah.
Okay, I need to watch it.
Yeah.
You know, or there's so many of these characters from 18th century fiction, because that was one of my specialties when I was an academic, or Wickham.
About the 18th century novel, which of course was the rise of the novel, the birth of the novel, is that we didn't have these rules yet about how protagonists had to be likable. Nobody had thought of that yet. That's why we have such wonderful 19th century, 18th and 19th century, you know, people that we look back on now and say, wait, isn't this the villain, not the protagonist, not the heroine?
Jean, exactly. Every time I teach Wuthering Heights, I've always got a couple of people in one of my favorite novels. One of the people in the class.
I just don't like her.
I hate Heathcliff. I don't like anyone in this book. I'm like, you're not supposed to.
Right. I mean, they don't like you either. What's the point? No, it's really, I would say it's a mid to late 20th century new rule. Yes. That you are supposed to like, you're supposed to want to be friends with the protagonist. And, you know, I am lucky enough to have real friends in my real life. I do not need a made-up character in a novel to be my friend, thank goodness. I've always loved writing about unlikable people, maybe because there aren't that many of them in my real life.
Yes.
You know, when people, and this is one of the most frequent criticisms of many of my novels, you know, that have these protagonists you don't want to have a beer with, basically. And I just want to say, you know, next question, you know,
you're rooting for her.
You don't like her, but you know, she doesn't like you either. Surely we are reading for other reasons, but maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, somehow you manage, you know, it's like we're definitely rooting for her. And you know, I just can't, the whole time I just couldn't wait to see what she was going to do next, you know. And
him, we're rooting for him. Let's talk about him and her, right? We're rooting for them both. We're rooting for them both. And the inanities of the Jean, also the scenes of the signings, the people who are last online. Okay, that detail, I was screaming with laughter. Every single event I did for The Critic's Daughter, the last person online, you know, the booksellers were like, oh, you're so nice that you waited and you went to the end of the line. They went to the end of the line because they wanted to corner you and have a long talk or give you their manuscript, right? Oh,
I just want to say that I am not the first person to point this out. I read about this. I mean, until recently, I never had a line, so I couldn't have written it from personal experience. But the actor Richard E. Grant wrote this very funny memoir about going on the road with his book. Wait, maybe he wrote an article about going on the road with his book, and he talked about this person who is always at the end of the line, and they let people go in front of them because they want to be back there, because they have this fantasy that you're going for beer, you're going to the pub or whatever. And he had a very unkind name for them, which I will not repeat, but I started to notice it after I read that article, and it is a phenomenon. And I just want to say, you know, to be completely upfront about this, I did it once. I did it once. It was one of my son's favorite comedians. He was at Barnes and Noble, and we were like, "Oh, you go in front of us. You go in front of us." Yeah, it is a thing. I'm guilty, and let's just leave it there.
You did it as a mom, though, Jean. That's the way to do it.
And I'm not above, you know, look, I'm not sure there is a living writer I would do that for. I would have to, I mean, because I'm respectful. I mean, even somebody like Stephen King, whom I revere, I wouldn't do that to him. I would say, it's so lovely to meet you, and thank you for everything you've done for me, and reading you since Carrie, and all the other stuff that anybody says. Yeah, I wouldn't do
Jean,
it.
okay, I'm glad you mentioned Stephen King. I must make a confession. Even though I am a genre reader, I have never read a Stephen King.
Are you serious?
I've seen all the movies and I love them. Carrie is one of my favorite movies, but I have never read a Stephen King,
Why
except
would you rob yourself of such pleasure?
Jean, the only Stephen King I've read. It gets mentioned in your book. On writing. Okay. I have it here when I teach writing. I have it here with my still writing, which you also mentioned. Danny Shapiro, we love you, and that's a great book. The other ones, The Writing Life by Annie Dillard, The Art of Memoir by Mary Karr, have my little shelf. And there's that's another moment that I screamed with laughter. Where they're all lined up. You remember what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
You got all the writing books, and
she's thinking, what is the purpose of writing a check to one of these expensive MFA programs? Just go rent a cheap apartment, get yourself a copy of On Writing, and, do the work. Because for both these protagonists of the plot and the latecomer, of all the terrible things that can justly be said about them, you cannot say that they didn't do the work. They did the work. They wrote the books. They did not steal. I am of the opinion that Jake, despite his dark night of the soul, did nothing wrong.
Absolutely not.
Right.
And nothing that we all have not done. We are magpies of stories, personal experiences, ours and others. This is what we have always done. I will not feel bad about it. And then you may ask in the case of Jake, well, if that's the truth, and it is, what was he so worried about? What's the problem? Why is he so afraid of being accused of plagiarism or some bad thing that he didn't do? And the answer is, in our current world, literally and otherwise, just the appearance of impropriety, the accusation, is enough to destroy a career. And we've seen that, and it's not pleasant. And he does not want that. And that's why he hides what he did.
Right.
And everything, and you talk, this is even more, I would say, in the sequel, this idea of people are so litigious. We have a fabulous lawyer character. Oh, I love it. It's an amazing satire of the legal profession. That's another thing you do. I'm sorry, but you do, Jean. Okay. The college kids needing the law. Oh, it was just hilarious. The laundry list of the different clients that this lawyer has. It was so funny.
Yeah, that was amazing.
So hilarious.
I liked it so much.
Oh, you were just, it was so, and conservative talk radio. You do a brilliant satire of that. Toxic masculinity, cancel culture. There's just, I felt like this book was very capacious in the sense that it wasn't limited to being about how we make plots and how we make fiction and like the blurry lines between fiction and reality. What's memoir and what's fiction? When I teach a mixed genre writing class, and one of the questions that I so often get asked is, should I fictionalize my memoir? To protect myself? And these are big themes that are implicit in both of your books, right? Like how do people feel when their life experience is used in a story, in a book, whether it's a novel or a memoir by somebody who knew that person. And I had to go through
perennial
this.
Topic, and it's perennial controversy.
Exactly.
Right. And like this whole meta thing, like the story within the story within the story. And I just wonder, if you could talk a little bit about that. Like, what was that like for you constructing that, the story within the story?
Fiendishly complex. And I want to acknowledge my debt to Google Spreadsheets. Thank you, Google Spreadsheets. Thank you, Google Spreadsheets. Could not possibly have kept track of every version of the story without a kind of spatial thing in front of me. It's fiendishly complex. And the thing that people need to remember is that you don't have every great idea in order as you're writing it. You can have a great idea about something that happened 100 pages ago and go back and put it in.
Exactly.
The credit of feeling like, having it look like you had a great idea in the moment. But,
I think that was just something that I thought that was so special about this, because it just really gets at reality, because everyone has a different side of a story, and there's so many facets to every story, and we get to really, see that how the truth is skewed in so many different ways, and how it is from Jake's perspective, and how it is from the brother's perspective, and and how much the truth, her own truth, is actually really different, and so for that aspect, I thought that was just really, really cool.
And also, we all have absorbed this notion that if we read it in a book, it's true. Even if it's a novel, we assume that it's true. There's a character in the sequel who makes an assumption about our protagonist because she read it in a novel.
Yeah.
She read it in a novel by somebody who happened not to have a grip of the facts, but also, didn't feel compelled to write facts. And that's why it's called fiction.
Right. And the same thing comes up when it gets adapted, right? Or when there's like a documentary, or then there's a film version, or there's a novel, and then the novel is adapted into film, and then it's just, it takes on all of these different lives, and not which version is the truth, So it brings up that point. And and you, having had that experience, had your works adapted. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what that was like, your truth versus the truth, that came out in the adaptation.
My made up truth.
Right.
Although there are 2 things in progress, only 2 have been adapted so far, and they were very different experiences. Admission was first, and I did see the script, and I knew exactly what changes the scriptwriter had made, and I understood why she'd made them, but it was still, she had taken like the big twist and moved it way up to the beginning of the book. So, she had provided other suspenseful elements, but when I read it on the page, I thought, oh my God, now what is this book going to be about? Because this thing, it was also more skewed toward comedy because Tina Fey was in it. So, it's a kind of in that gray area between comedy and drama. But the novel was 100%, literary fiction. There was no comedy at all. I mean, not that you can't have comedy in literary fiction, but
Right. I'm sure some of that's necessary just because screen time is so different from book time, right? And so they have to, make it engaging for the audience on screen.
It's an adaptation, and nobody's making you sell your book. And, nobody forced me, nobody handcuffed me and said, sign over the rights or we'll, whatever. I did it, and I did it with open eyes, and actually, I really enjoyed the film of Admission, but it doesn't feel like my book. By the time we got to The Undoing, which was adapted from You Should Have Known, I was warned again by David E. Kelley that really he was going in a radically different direction. He was going to take the characters and the situation and really make it more of a suspense novel, a suspense story with a whodunit element, with a whole legal courtroom trial, none of which was in the book. So I was ready. I really detached. But, it was the middle of the pandemic, and we were all so out of it, I think we were just happy to have some entertainment.
Absolutely. I mean, you wrote the plot during the pandemic, correct?
Yeah, I wrote the plot during the pandemic because my novel, The Latecomer, was going so horribly wrong, and my editor kept rejecting it. And, when the pandemic started, she said, why don't you put aside The Latecomer and write that other story you were telling me about, the plot? And that is what I did. And unlike The Latecomer, which I was into several years by then, it just came pouring out in 4 months.
Oh, unbelievable.
Need for revision. And it was only after writing The Latecomer that the plot, that I was able to go back to The Latecomer and see very clearly what was wrong with it. So,
see, Heidi, isn't that another incredibly inspiring aspect of Jean's story? I heard you. I mean, Jean, you just mentioned offhand this idea that you had for the plot, and then your editor was like, "That's the one that you should do."
Kind of, yeah.
It's extraordinary, and it just shows you patience and just long game if you want to be a writer, right?
I mean, looking back, life can only be understood backward, but we have to live it forward.
Yeah.
That day was so awful because my beloved editor,
Yeah.
who's committed to me as a writer, was saying to me, this is not good enough.
Yeah.
I am not publishing this. I'm not going to give you a contract and let you revise it. I'm not giving you a contract.
Yeah.
And I was, several years into this book, and I was really just moving pieces around. I was out of ideas. I was out of, I had no juice anymore. I had nothing. And I just didn't know if I had another revision in me. And it was in this meeting where we were talking about this that I started to say, well, okay, I have this other idea. And I still don't know where it came from. Obviously we're all writers, and writers are obsessed with plagiarism and appropriation because we are. And I guess I always thought it would be really interesting to write about a writer who steals in some sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's just so much about the creative process, like that whole anecdote that you just spoke about, because, a lot of times when you get stuck on something, just putting it aside for a little while is so great. Like it's such a great way of refinding your path, and then just working on something else and then coming back to it. It's just, it works for a lot of disciplines and not just writing.
Heidi, you're so right about that. And the other thing I'm going to say is, like, one of the reasons why Jean is an extraordinary literary citizen, right? She supports other writers. She tells the truth about her own experience in a way I think a lot of people curate their experience, and they're like, yes, I didn't work hard. This book just poured out of me. And yes, and they don't tell the truth. Almost every major writer that my mother represents, and she's represented most of them, have had a book rejected at some point.
Mm-hmm, sure.
But they don't acknowledge it. They're just like, yes, I went from this one to this one. Well, meanwhile, there was I know because I'm in the know. And Jean tells the truth about that. And she acknowledges, I wanted readers. And that's why I wrote a legal thriller. And I have dreams of writing a thriller one day, Jean. You've given me hope that maybe I could.
I think you should do a thriller about like a scholar of the early novel. What about A.S. Byatt's novel? What was it called?
Possession.
Possession.
Yes.
Yeah, everybody read it.
Right. It's so fascinating, because that is so much about what we hear in these types of interviews, right? Like, oh, it was so great. And I went from this success to that success. But the part that you don't see is like, everybody has the same struggles, during the creative process. And it's just like part of it. And it's totally okay. And
Heidi, it's part of it. And when you were introducing my books, you said 2001. I was like, it was 2011. Thank God it wasn't 22 years between my books.
Sorry about that.
But it was 12. It was 12. Yeah. And I had a book in between them that was turned down.
Oh,
so
you did?
I'm just going on the record right now that I did. And I also had parents.
Well, you're a little younger than me, and Heidi, I don't know how old you are, but I have been around long enough that I have seen the shape of many literary careers. Those young, up and coming writers who were my contemporaries in the 1980s, almost all of them are gone now. And the ones who are not gone have had, it's turned out to maybe not be such a great thing to have your greatest success at the very beginning of your career. I'm never going to be happy that my first two novels were turned down, but I am happy that they weren't published. You can see the difference.
Yeah, totally.
Because they were not good enough. And if they had been published, I might not have had the opportunity to get better. And I might, like I said, that famous Kierkegaard quote, life has to be lived forwards, but it can only be understood backwards. I look back now and I see a long career and a career that went in the right direction, but I didn't know any of that at the time. It was very, it was a struggle, but again, I was always able, or my agent was always able to find somebody to ignore my terrible, terrible sales record, which is, like the chain we drag behind us.
Oh, yep.
I mean, I think you just have to be ready to fail. And then when you want to do anything, you have to be ready to fail at first, and then just be okay with that.
Said fail again, fail better, right?
Right. And the fact that you've been able to pick yourself
up. It's in this book. That quote is in here.
That's right. And then the first line of that book, which is so funny, is, first of all, it wasn't even that hard. Right. And so, it's just hilarious, because most people know that that's just not, how it goes. Right.
Jean, can I ask you? Exactly. Jean, I just want to give you a shout out also for the intertextuality and the last anything is possible is the last chapter. Because as I was reading this through the first time, I was like, what writer wrote a sequel that was better? And I just taught a 12-week class on Elizabeth Strout, and I've reviewed her last 3 or 4 books for the Boston Globe. And I feel like My Name is Lucy Barton is not as good as the later Lucy books. So I was screaming with laughter. Paradise Regained. I used to teach Paradise Lost at Yale to the Yale English majors, and no one reads Paradise Regained. Paradise Regained is for it's kind of sappy. It is where Jesus comes back, and everybody wants Paradise Lost because that's where the devil is sexy and charismatic, right? But I actually believe that Jean has written a book that is better than the original, which was great.
Oh, well, I'm glad you're not going to ask me if I've read Paradise Regained, because what we're dancing around here is this little meta decision that I made in the middle of the first draft of the sequel to make the title chapters, the chapter titles themselves, the titles of sequels. So I started to compile a list of sequels. Some were not usable. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, not usable. But there are, Anything is Possible is the sequel to My Name is Lucy Barton.
Yes, it's the second in that series. Yeah.
Right. And the one that really got me started down that road was the sequel to Fear of Flying, which is called How to Save Your Own Life, which is a fantastic title.
That's what that is. I didn't recognize that title.
How to Save Your Own Life became the chapter title of a chapter in which somebody was indeed trying to save their own life. So
I just love all the Easter eggs. It's just makes it so much fun afterwards.
Heidi, doesn't it? I love it that you use the phrase Easter eggs, because my favorite television show right now, other than the Bachelor franchise, is Only Murders in the Building.
Oh, I love that.
And there's so many Easter eggs in that. And I feel like Jean's fiction is like the fictional equivalent. Like that show, I think might be the greatest show ever in television. I'm obsessed with it. Yeah, and I used to take piano lessons in that building, Jean. The Belle Nord, which is called the Arconia on that show. That was where I went for my piano lessons. It was a rent-controlled. My piano teacher had a rent-controlled apartment.
Of course she did.
Of course. And he's still there, and he's holding on at 91. Paul Sheftel, if you're watching. But I just feel like the richness, the intertextuality, the elusiveness that's lightly worn, it's never pretentious, but there's so much depth. Like I could teach your books in a college class and have students write essays about them with imagery patterns. I mean, you have a Pride and Prejudice illusion in the first couple of pages. There's so much going on, but yet it's a ripping yarn and a great story and engaging characters. And I don't want to have a beer or watch The Bachelor or The Bachelorette with your characters. They would be the villains. She would be the villain on the season, right? She would be the villain on the season.
But okay, so I'd like to take some questions that we have from our watchers. So one is, well, this is not really a question. This is just Dan Zaleski saying that he loved the plot and he just wanted to pass that along. And then we have, yes, I'm reading the next one here. Okay, so from Katie Adler. Do you have a much older sibling? The latecomer really captured the dynamic between siblings with a significant age difference. And my brother is 14 years older than me, and the novel really captured our dynamic.
Right. So the answer is no. I have a sibling who's 3.5 years older. But again, through the magic of fiction, I can imagine any scenario except a science fiction scenario because my brain does not go there. But I mean, I first began to think about this kind of family configuration in which there are children born close together, in this case, triplets, and then a generation later, another child is born from a leftover embryo from that set of triplets. They are the same age, and yet they are, 18 years apart. I started to think about that when I read a memoir by the English novelist Susie Boyd called My Judy Garland Life. And
wow,
she's a member of quite a famous British family, but her siblings were much, much older. And by the time she came along, all of the great bohemian adventures they were having in the 60s and 70s were over. So when people would say to her, "Oh, I know all about your fabulous family and all your adventures," she would say, "Yeah, that's my older siblings. Yeah, not me." So, I mean, just this idea of missing your own family was very intriguing to me. Adding the assisted fertility piece made it even more kind of poignant that this was not sort of nature and chance making you born when you were born. This is a bored lab technician eating a tuna fish sandwich going, "Okay, I'm going to pick this one out and send it to the lab." And the irony also in that case is that was the embryo that was supposed to be the successful fertilization, because the mother, the parents in this particular case had not been able to carry any pregnancies to term, and then suddenly triplets happen. So it's that one that was going to be sent to the competent womb when this last attempt at in vitro fertilization ended, who ends up spending 18 years in the deep freeze in Connecticut. So it's mind-blowing, really.
Wow. Okay, we have another question from Henry Kerrigan. I have been teaching parts of your book in my intro to publishing class.
Henry, hi, Henry. He's my friend.
Because of the novel's intertextuality and its ironic glimpses into the world of publishing. So it's more like a comment, but I guess you could have a reaction to that.
What I really don't understand in between the plot and the sequel, and I don't spend a lot of time, haunting Goodreads and Amazon, but I remember one response to the plot that was written on Goodreads a couple of years ago, where this woman said, "I'm really very offended by this book, and I feel I'm being patronized and talked down to and made fun of, and I'm very upset about it." And I remember thinking, I agree. I do not disagree with you. It's very hostile in a way to aspiring writers. And I'm wondering why there aren't more people who feel that way. And that in itself is kind of interesting. But my job is to make fun of everybody, I think. And the tension that exists at every level of this world.
Yes.
From the lowest to the highest.
Yes.
Equal, opportunity for me to make fun of them. And I think because it took so long for me to be a successful writer, whatever that means, I'm entitled to reflect on every layer of this world. So,
Jean, that is such a good point, though, that you're making, because I was thinking about it from the aspirants, from the sweaty, assiduous aspirants to the most prominent and powerful gatekeepers. No one escapes your biting wit and your satiric glance, and I love it.
Well, isn't it Jane Austen who said, "What are we here for except to make fun of our neighbors?"
And laugh at them in our turn. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Life is hard. Let's
Why not laugh?
But at the same time, I feel compassion for that woman, and I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Sorry I did that.
Okay, another question from Dan. Thank you for this great literary discussion. What would you tell young people who say fiction doesn't matter?
Oh, they haven't read fiction. I mean, fiction allows us to be empathic towards people that we'd never be empathic towards in real life. I mean, if somebody offends us, the last thing we want to do is like pause our day in order to think about what that person might be going through. But when we read about them in a novel, we can't help but ask ourselves, you know, who are you? Why are you behaving this way? And, you know, I have learned more from Dickens. You know, my essential morality was formed by my ethical culture education, but it was topped off by the work of Charles Dickens, who's, you know, who I understand was a real shite in real life.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter to me. It's a long time ago, and I didn't know anybody who was affected, but I can say that his works have, you know, really made me see the suffering around me. And, you know, that is the great gift of fiction. Also, Dickens. I mean, Dickens, he was hilarious.
Hilarious.
And those revelations and, oh my God. I mean, the gift of Charles Dickens is just, it will never end.
Jean, I could not agree more with you. And my Brearley education, we went to, these are two private schools of the city that are quite similar. And at Brearley, we read Great Expectations. We spent 3 months on it in 7th grade. And
that's a statement in itself.
My friends and I still text each other inside jokes based on our reading of Great Expectations. It cultivated our empathy. It is probably my favorite novel of all time. But Bleak House, I taught an 8-week class on Bleak House for Yale recently. And it is just, and I could not agree with you more. Yeah. And I also could not agree more with you that there's a wonderfully satiric scene, and I know we have to stop soon, Heidi, but you asked me for great comic set piece about, we can't, if you're a man, you can't write a woman. If you're, you know, if you're not this, you can't write about that. And the great thing about, and especially 18th century fiction, right? All those novels that are written in the first person and they're women, but they're written by male writers. We gain access to other lives, other experiences. We see ourselves and other people, but we also see otherness for the first time, right? Recognizing it. This is a person who isn't like me. And it builds bridges and it cultivates empathy. And it's also thrilling and beautiful and hilarious. And it's an escape and it's a return to the truth and ourselves at the same time.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Yeah. If we love language and we love stories, there's nothing better.
Nothing better.
Absolutely. I mean, I love
stories for
creating empathy. I think couldn't be more.
Again, I don't watch sports, so I'm probably missing something there.
Yeah, but I can't imagine anything more important than cultivating empathy. Really, I mean, like, you know, it's just such a way of bringing people together and sharing, you know, experience. And how else are we supposed to do it but through storytelling, right? I mean, it's super important. Amazing. So just a couple more comments. And then, so from Eileen Brownson, great discussion. I want to start reading one of your books real soon. Thank you, Jean. And Adele Zinberg, I loved the sequel, which I think is just a nice comment. And Michelle Favilla, you are inspirational.
Yeah, that Michelle is a regular at my pop-up book group. So hi, Michelle. It's great to see you here.
Yeah, fabulous. Yeah, so thanks so much for this discussion. Is there anything else that either of you feel that you want to add?
Well, I just want to apologize to anybody who's been listening to my mother's dog yapping outside my door here. I don't know if you can hear her. I can hear her. Everybody's a critic, right?
Yeah, everybody's a critic.
Everybody's a critic.
The only thing I want to say is that I could talk to Jean for 24 hours straight and never be done. I really do feel that, and my mother says this too, Jean, you are the best. You are not only an extraordinary writer, you are an incredible literary citizen, and the world of literature and publishing, it's so much better because you're in it. I just want to thank you.
Well, I absolutely accept that. But I just want to point out that one of the reasons that I'm happy that I do Book the Writer is that I am not a blurber. So anybody who's ever asked me for a blurb probably doesn't think of me as a good but that is only because I'm in the 1980s 80s when I read Spy magazine. And
R.I.P. Spy.
there was a column called Log Rolling in Our Time, which basically made fun of the world of blurbs.
Yeah.
And they would have author A on author B and then author B on author A right next to each other. And I just thought, I'm not going to do that. And it was easy. It was easy then because nobody was asking me. But over the years, I was able to wean myself, or at least persuade my publisher to stop asking people for blurbs. And I've only given one blurb, and that was for my best friend from college, who after many years published a novel, and there was just no way I wasn't going to help her. But no, I mean, I don't do it. So
there are many ways to be a great literary citizen, and Richard Gilman would approve. You remember the anecdote from The Critic's Daughter where he would turn people down, or he was like, why are they asking me for this? Scratch your back, I'll scratch yours. No, if it's not good, I'm not going to blurb it. And you have to create a boundary. My mom always says that, just saying, I don't do it.
yeah.
And
I mean, there are so many attitudes toward this. I actually have a friend who recently told me I only blurb books I haven't read. So there you go. Right.
Telling.
Right. And then people would come up to them and say, I read that book you recommended and I didn't like it. Read it. So do not assume anything when it comes to blurbs.
Wow.
Amazing. I feel like I could talk to you two women forever, but I guess we do have to stop at some point.
Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you so much for being here, and I would highly recommend that everyone go out and read these books, especially whether you read it or whether you listen to the audio. It's just so entertaining and fun, and I really enjoyed both of them, and especially also The Critic's Daughter as well. So,
oh, thank you, Heidi.
Yes. So all of the books that are mentioned are definitely worth delving into. And yeah, so thank everyone so much for this, and I hope everyone has a wonderful night.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Okay, bye.